this Tuesday, October 13th, and we are talking about U.S. history. We're talking about downtown Portland. We're talking about the protests and the different kind of protests that we saw Sunday night. They called it Indigenous Day of Rage. It's Columbus Day to most cities across the U.S. In Oregon in 2017, it was changed to Indigenous Peoples Day to recognize, the Native Americans and what they lost when Columbus arrived here in the Americas. History lesson over. Let's talk about your feelings, your thoughts on seeing two of those statues right in front of the Portland Art Museum and the Oregon Historical Society torn down late Sunday night. People pulled vans up and put chains around those statues. In a matter of moments, they were pulled down. And then right there at the Oregon Historical Society, they added it all up, $25,000 worth of damage to a lot of the windows. They threw lit flares into the Historical Society and tried to light it on fire. Right. Police and the DA have said that luckily did not work. This man, Brandon Bartels, he's from Pasco, Washington. He was arrested in the driver's seat of that van with 5 other people in the van after pulling down the Teddy Roosevelt on horseback statue. Turns out he was also arrested back in August for a curfew violation in the protests in Kenosha, Wisconsin, after the police shooting of Jacob Blake. So he's obviously been traveling around to some of these protests. What do you guys think as you kind of weigh in? Not you two, but our watchers. Pulling
the curtain back a little bit, when we talked about this subject this morning in our pre-show meeting, like way back at 4 o'clock in the morning, it was brought up. One of our Sunrise team members brought up, were the statues, sort of, for lack of a better word, the victims of random acts of violence that night. And I think the 3 of us, were all in agreement that no, they were targeted. Those statues were for whatever reasons the protesters had that night. Talking about the statue of Abraham Lincoln, talking about the statue of Theodore Roosevelt. And then this morning on the Sunrise Show, we actually ran a Verify report from Kristen Severance that sort of addressed why those 2 statues may have been were targeted. And we have that report. We can show it to you right now.
We don't know why protesters targeted the statues, but we can verify historical facts surrounding both presidents. Columbus Day is a legal holiday commemorating the arrival of Christopher Columbus to the Americas in 1492. It's celebrated by some states on the second Monday of October. Other states, including Oregon, since 2017, now commemorate the day as Indigenous Peoples Day, a day to recognize the mistreatment of Native populations after the arrival of Columbus. Protesters called Sunday the, quote, Indigenous Peoples Day of Rage. 200 people marched downtown. Some destroyed statues in Portland, including the Theodore Roosevelt and Abraham Lincoln statues in the South Park blocks, both in Portland since the 1920s. The Lincoln statue had Dakota 38 spray painted on its base, referencing the 38 Dakota men executed in 1862. According to historians, Lincoln approved the hanging of 38 Dakota men after a violent conflict with white settlers in Minnesota. He later commuted the sentences of 265 others. According to historians, Roosevelt said hostile and derogatory things about Native Americans, including, quote, I don't go so far as to think that the only good Indians are dead Indians, but I believe 9 out of every 10 are. And he pushed policies including the allotment system, where Native American land was allotted to those who became U.S. citizens first and white settlers second. Do you have something you want us to verify? Let us know. Email us at verify@kgw.com.
Okay, so that's the overview, and you guys are definitely letting us know what you think. Becky Main Clement says this is terrorism. Why are they letting this continue? And Chris Ellery, or I hope I'm not butchering your name, but she says, protesters don't tear down statues, criminals do. And then Jennifer Taft, good morning to you. She's one of our regulars. She said, I'm sad about the museum and agree with the rest. I worry, however, about the president wanting maximum FBI charges in this heated environment, I think.
Just above that comment, Brenda, I see one from Tony Davis, who I know watches quite regularly here on Sunrise Extra. She says, "It's a shame. Our Portland is gross. We need a leader," says Tony, "who is going to act and not talk. This is not about equality. It's about destruction." Then she comments that the arrested individuals will only be let out.
Nina, you were talking about the DA, Mike Schmidt.
Yeah.
What is he going to do?
So Mike Schmidt, as we all know, we ran this story last week. He has dropped about 70% of all the criminal cases that have come out of these months and months of protests and riots. So a lot of those charges, most of them, have been dropped. But late yesterday, he did send out a statement saying that these arrests made from Sunday night, he is going to prosecute. He says he has enough evidence, video documentation and police evidence that these guys arrested will face these charges. And in that statement, he wrote, "It is sickening to me to see the destruction that occurred in Portland overnight. The damage in the park blocks, to the Historical Society and other businesses is inexcusable." He goes on to say, about all of the proud work that the Historical Society does. This is the sentence that kind of stuck out to me, and I want to know what you guys think about it. He says, "This violence and property destruction is without purpose and justification. My office remains committed to prosecuting individuals who commit these types of crimes so we can protect public safety. This violence and property destruction is without purpose and justification," because he has said, he kind of goes along with some of the ideology of, you can't commit violence against a building. And so a lot of those charges for graffiti or other, misdemeanor level crimes, he has dropped. So an interesting statement by the DA, but he is going to prosecute these folks arrested on Sunday, which has only been 3 arrests so far.
If you flip the sentence around, I assume it's not about the protesting or the demonstrations. I don't think he's saying those are without purpose. I believe it's just specifically the destruction. And I guess he's keying in on the destruction. Whatever you're destroying, there is no reason for that.
Yesterday during the mayor's press conference, Representative Tana Sanchez, who represents Portland and is in the Native community herself, basically my paraphrase said, stop hijacking Indigenous Peoples Day to commit violence. And she told me in a separate interview that the people in her community that she's talking to, they don't want that. They don't support that. Right. And they are about the Black Lives Matter movement. And she told me that's what this should be about, not about anything else at this moment.
Larissa Williams saying, it makes me sad the Historical Society was destroyed and what Portland has turned into. We know that, those folks so well down at the Historical Society, and it is just so sad. And the killer yesterday was, they had this quilt that was made over a period of 3 years by Black women in the 70s. And it talks about all kinds of Black history, and it was redisplayed in the Historical Society. It was stolen in those riots. It was brought down the street. It was found on the sidewalk, soaking wet and dirty. They picked it up after those riots, and they're trying to repair it and dry it out, and they think they'll be able to display it again. But it's just, any type of, and the mayor even saying, there is no message behind this. You're not saying anything of importance. You're just out there for violence. And if you're hurting the actual communities and minority-owned restaurants that were shot into and windows broken, there is no message there. You're destroying the people you're claiming to help.
I have a thoughtful message here from Jamie Garman Smith this morning. Jamie Garman Smith says, "Our history may not be perfect, but it's our history. It's what shaped us into who we are. So we learn from this, and then we make changes if needed." And changes have happened, says Jamie, with more change that needs to happen. I feel the message and the change we all want is being lost in this destruction.
The 3 of us talking history scares me.
Right?
Sometimes I'm like, I am so not qualified. So what I like to do, and I did it throughout the newscast today, is I just started looking at different articles, academic articles, things that were published in various newspapers. It's like, what do people who actually study this, the scholars, have to say about all of it? And I feel like if I start to feel a little uncomfortable with something, that perhaps I'm getting in good territory, because I like to be challenged about what I think. And, before we went on the air, we were talking about not the destruction of the statues, but how should we venerate the founding fathers in the bigger picture, because it is a complicated history that the United States of America has. So I found this one article by David A. Bell. He's a history professor, and I believe he works at Princeton. But I thought that this was pretty wise. He says, I'm just going to read a piece of it.
Okay.
When it comes to particular figures in the past, such judgments involve, above all, looking carefully at their entire historical record. So in the case of George Washington, for instance, it involves weighing his role as a slave owner against his role as a heroic commander-in-chief, as an immensely popular political leader who resisted the temptation to become anything more than a Republican chief executive, and who brought the country together around the new Constitution. And then he contrasts that with John Calhoun, who was vice president. And he says, above all, he devoted his political career entirely to the defense of slavery. So this historian says the distinction between those two is obvious, right? So you've got to take the record in its entirety, in the context of our country. And that made sense to me. Right? Because we can't erase or cancel every single thing that happened, and we can't look at every single thing that has happened through the lens of 2020.
Right.
Exactly.
You know, statues are tough. I was sitting there going, you know, should we just stop making statues? I mean, is there a problem in putting up statues? Because at some point, whether it's next week or 2 years from now or 50 years from now, whenever, 500 years from now, you know, you might find something or unearth something about that individual that really shows that they were not statue worthy, so to speak. Because, you know, ultimately, we've seen so many statues come down recently, and some of them rightfully so. On a totally different, you know, I always think about that statue of Joe Paterno at Penn State University. Not to get completely off the topic,
yeah. But
in some ways you think, why should a statue go up of a football coach anyway, right? I mean, do football coaches deserve statues?
That is religion in many parts of the country, right?
But then, man, no sooner did that statue go up than it had to be removed because of all the scandal at Penn State and his association with that. It just, for some reason, when I was reading all the stories this weekend while I was off about the destruction in downtown Portland and the statues that were removed, I just went back to my Pennsylvania days and thought about that Paterno statue and how, you know, it was removed under different circumstances. No statue is really safe, it seems, anymore, and it's tough to think of someone who would probably live up to the billing if you were to erect a statue of them. Are there perfect human beings out there? Are there perfect statue-worthy human beings?
I do think, like, you know, we've covered the Confederate statues, you know, in various states, and people who want them to stay say that's part of our history.
Right.
I think perhaps that's where it should be, is in a museum.
Right,
we can't destroy those things, right? We can't. But do we put them in a public square where various people have
the place of honor,
relationships to that history? When I lived in Louisiana, I did a couple little road trips as I was a grad student, and, you know, went into Mississippi and various places, and people would drive around with their Confederate flags. As an African American, I grew up with a much different generational I guess, narrative about what that meant for me and for my family. So it did kind of give me a little bit of the creeps to see it. Again, that's not everybody's, but that is the point, is where does it belong? And who's to say that my perspective is right versus somebody else's? But those are the bigger issues that we grapple with.
I wanted to give you my full attention, Brenda, but I pull my head away from all the comments. If you ever see us staring at the phones during the Sunrise Extra conversation, we are not bored with the talk. We just really want to get your perspective on the conversation this morning, and people are chiming in. Well, that's a huge one. I'm going to have to proofread that one before I read it out loud because there's a lot of big words in there that I don't know if I can spit out easily. I'll get back to yours. That was from Tima Carlson, but let me jump into Willie Huey's comment. Willie says, why can't everyone just chill and be cool, man? How do people have time and energy for all this stuff? I can barely get my chores done at my house by the end of the day, let alone to do all this destruction in downtown Portland. That's Willie Huey chiming in this morning.
Audrey,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, Audrey Birch says about the statues, you should leave them. It is history. You learn from it. You don't destroy it.
I mean, we have not aired anybody who said that they support the people who are out there tearing down statues. I'm sure they're out there, but I have not heard one, and I certainly have not seen one on KGW.
No, and I thought that press conference yesterday, you know, with the mayor and with the, you know, state representative who was with the Native community and the Oregon Historical Society saying, you know, we're the historical society. We tell the good, the bad, the ugly,
right.
You know, and it's in every state and every country around the globe, you know, of like, that's how you get better, hopefully, is you learn from the, you know, the bad. Jones says this destruction is totally senseless. History, good or bad, is what formed this country. It's shaped us as a country and as a people. These people that are doing this should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Many of these statues formed freedom for us and the work they did to form this country. That Teddy Roosevelt statue on horseback that's right in the park in front of the Portland Art Museum, it had been there for 98 years. It stood in that spot. So they say it's about $20,000 damage. I think the Abe Lincoln statue had about $10,000 damage. They're going to repair it. They say they'll put it back up. The Historical Society going to repair itself. $25,000 in damage to all those expensive glass windows there. Luckily, not much else happened inside. But the Jimmy John's restaurant, there was a Subway, there was another minority-owned restaurant nearby that had all their windows smashed. Someone had a loaded gun. That person was arrested and will be charged, who shot into one of those restaurants. So,
you know, sadly, I've almost come to expect those statues being torn down now. We've seen so much destruction over the last few months in downtown Portland. I will say I was most sad to see the destruction to the Historical Society's building. And if I can share my own personal opinion, I do believe that they have the right idea in mind when it comes to that place, that organization, the Historical Society. One thing that I've always thought is great about them is that they charge no admission if you live in Multnomah County. So it's like this free resource for anyone who lives in Multnomah County to come check it out. They're not there to turn a profit. Yes. They're really there to share the history. And like you guys said earlier, some of that history is not pretty. Some of it is bad, but they share it all. And I was sad, absolutely sad to see that building get destroyed on Sunday night.
So I'd be curious with the people who are watching, how do you think this is going to end? You know, I looked at Nina during the show and I said, oh my God, what do the next few weeks have in store for us? I mean, we've got an election. We will either have the incumbent mayor staying in office, or we'll have Sarah Iannarone, or, you know, taking over as the new mayor. I don't know what's going to happen.
I will tell you.
They better have a plan in place.
Yeah.
Election night, I almost think no matter what happens.
That's November 3rd, right? A Tuesday, of course. Yeah. I did not have the guts. I did not have the cojones, so to speak, to take off on the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, or 5th.
Oh, the boss would not, let you.
I did take off the 6th through the 13th of November,
smart.
So we'll see if that vacation is allowed to stand or not. I almost wanted to put it for that first week of November. I was like, that's not going to fly.
Yeah.
Yes, Jennifer Taft, I really want to know. Tell me what you think.
She said, do you really want to know?
Do you really want to know?
Let's see. Shelley says her husband's company left downtown entirely because of the destruction. Businesses are fleeing. Who are these people destroying our city? It was 2 Portland residents and the guy from Pasco, Washington, who had flown to Wisconsin to protest as well. And, you know, they're looking to make more arrests as well. But yeah, they've got to have a plan in place. I saw some other city. Who was it? Baltimore? They were already, a memo to the police ranks had leaked out to the media, and they are really preparing for, you know, big time protests come election night in many American cities, I think.
Joshua Madrid has a comment here. Good morning to you, Joshua. Statues are important to the artists that created them. We're not losing history by tearing down statues, as we have books for that. I'm not here for violence, but I'm also not losing sleep, he says, over statues and windows. Systemic violence and injustice are what keeps me up.
But it's statues and windows, yes, first. That can be repaired. But it's the mental stamp now on everyone that doesn't want to come downtown because of that. And that is hurting small local businesses. It's hurting the farmers market. It's hurting, you know, students who are trying to study. We have a babysitter who's a sophomore student at Portland State, and every night, you know, like all of this screaming and breaking things and police lights, like it's, you know, it's hard for her to do her homework and get a good night's sleep. You just think of all of the ripple effects from these broken windows. I mean, you've got guns firing off. in crowds of 300 people on Sunday, like, yes, it's a window, but it's all of our livelihood and just being able to feel safe in your own city.
Sheila Speck chimes in saying, and I would agree with this, sort of, I guess, in an eye for an eye mentality. If the people responsible for this destruction, she says, I think that the people responsible for this destruction on Sunday night should have to pay for the damages to both the statues and the Historical Society. Now, why not, right? I mean, if you have the proof, if you have clear-cut evidence, say on camera or whatever the case is, of people who did the damage, I would absolutely be in favor of them paying 100% for any of those damages. And if you tell us you don't have the money to pay it up, well, whenever you do have some money, we're going to take a little bit of it until that is paid off, right? It could be the lifetime payment plan if need be, but absolutely, someone should be paying for this.
Yeah. And it says historical statues do not speak to forward progress. They romanticize the past. That doesn't include everyone. Tracy Shamblis says, I owned a car rental at 3rd and 4th on Washington, or between 3rd
downtown.
and 4th on Washington. These people have been what?
Downtown, sleeping, destroying elevators, stairwells.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Not, I try to divvy it up, but I do have another comment from, go ahead, Brenda, do you want to say one more thing?
Go ahead.
Okay, Tima Carlson. Tima Carlson says, I miss the 80s. We all got along back then and politics was not a part of it. And I only bring that up because I wonder sometimes about that. Was it different back in the 80s? Was
I think
it different
we remember
in the 70s?
all the good stuff.
Right, no. My gosh, that was the Reagan era.
Right.
My little Catholic school, University of Portland, I think was up in arms with all the Reagan cuts and to education and everything else. That was a different political time, but certainly.
I can never compare.
unrest.
The 80s for me was like, I was from 6 to 16, basically. So I can't compare my perspective
Things
then
were awesome for you. Same with me.
to things in my 40s now.
I didn't know about anything.
I do know during the 80s I would stand on stage and tell you how, the influence of the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. If you want to be challenged intellectually, Brenda Braxton, I suggest you read my 4th grade paper on the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. Eye-opening.
Oh, we
eye-opening essay.
back then.
But it is interesting, last thing I'll say, when you mentioned the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria.
Not that Nina.
I know, not that Nina. But, I mean, when I grew up, Columbus was celebrated. Never once did I hear anything about an indigenous person. Same with riots in Tulsa. I mean, it was just this year that I found out what happened.
Did you watch
Black Wall
Lovecraft
Street.
Country yesterday?
Yeah, but I was reading this just a couple of months ago. I did watch Lovecraft, and
they talk about that in this great HBO show.
That's something that I never learned in school,
right?
In college or in grad school. So I do think it's important for us to look at the overall history, just educate ourselves. We don't have to hate each other. Just educate ourselves, right? Let's do better.
Yes, and stop stealing everyone's political signs. Both of y'all.
There's that too.
Yes,
I did not.
Not Brenda.
What, me?
The people stealing the signs in Clark County. You can read
Do we
about
have to end the show on false accusations?
Right,
Everybody,
exactly. You're going to get him in trouble.
Said, be cool, man.
Be cool.
Just be cool.
Willie Huey.
Willie Huey, voice of reason on this Tuesday. You guys will see you tomorrow. Bye.